Grab your pre-workout and turn up that volume. It is time for a new episode of the Powerlifter's Den with your host, Cam Smith. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Powerlifter's Den. I'm your host, Cam Smith, and today I wanted to bring on an animal in the 220 weight class. Edward, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Ed Blair. I'm from Illinois, in the Chicago suburbs. I've been competing in powerlifting since 2019, and yeah, that's me.
So we'll start off by just telling everybody what your best lifts are and your best total.
All right, so my best total so far is 938 kilograms or 2,067 pounds, I believe. My best squat is 380 kilograms, 837 in wraps. 340 kilograms in sleeves, 749 pounds. For bench, it's 265 kilograms, 584 pounds. And then for deadlifts, it's 300 kilograms, 661 pounds.
Yeah, so you're a monster bencher, especially in the 220 weight class. So, is that something that's always been one of your stronger lifts, or is that something that took time to develop?
No, that's always been um, one of my stronger aspects, especially like starting to just lift in general. I think in high school at the end, I was able to bench like 405 for a single.
Damn.
I think a lot of it came in down to where the usual when I first got introduced to lifting, it was all about like arms and benching.
Yep.
Granted, like I played football, so we also did squats. So I wasn't like I was forgetting about that, but it was a big emphasis on that, coupled with the fact I have short arms too, which really helps. But yeah, definitely off the bat, like my first meet I did, um, that one we were close to chipping that all-time world record for bench press, which was nice. I mean, again, like this is my first time getting into the actual competition setting and stuff like that. So I've always been a strong bench presser. I've always wanted though to try and make sure the other three lists were kind of staying, which one of them isn't. But the hope is I don't want to be always thought of as a one trick pony.
Yeah. So you mentioned you played football. Did you just play in high school? Or did you play at the college level too?
I just played in high school. I played, well, again, with our school, we were a very small school, so we had to end up teaming up with two other schools. And that honestly was kind of awful because we had to play like all three ways. We had to play like offense, defense, and special teams. And some of our schools that we would have to play against, especially with the reconfiguration of the school sizes and stuff like that. You would have the bigger schools that had like 400 people on their team because you can't cut anybody. So technically, each position of all of them could have a fresh person as well as like multiple backups. So that was awful because like we were just like we could hold our ground for a bit, but once we got to the playoffs and stuff, that's when we got gas pretty much.
Yeah, I was from a small town in high school too, so I know the feeling of playing all both way well three ways. Yeah. Um,
hmm
so I guess a little bit about kind of what got you into powerlifting. Maybe if you had some influences, or if there was like a kind of like a moment where you're like, I want to compete.
Oh yeah. So again, coming from football, that's when I started lifting again, just to put on size because the I think it was more towards the middle of 11th grade. I was about 140 pounds, like December-ish. And then I started lifting, taking that more seriously. One, to just get bigger for football. And then two, college was coming up. I didn't want, my mindset was I didn't want to get picked on in college.
Yep.
And so I grew to about 185 to 190 from January to May, pretty much. I don't know how that happened. Again, it wasn't like muscle and everything. It was like a little bit of everything. But I mean, that was the one thing that really started everything. Again, doing that in football, I had to drop from cornerback down to strong safety because I wasn't mobile anymore, and running back to fullback. It was pretty bad because I didn't realize how bad it took a toll until I started, going back out there for spring training and summer, and I was like, oh my god, this is awful now. So lifting started right there with a couple of friends. Thought it'd be a good idea. So I started more in bodybuilding. I never really thought about the strong aspect. I knew I was sort of strong, but not like anything spectacular. So I was like, okay, we'll just bodybuild because that's where a lot of my friends were kind of, doing their thing. So going into college, a lot of that time for the first year, a little bit, was mainly focused on the bodybuilding aspect. Again, I don't know, I was a guy, so occasionally I would do some one rep maxes, but it was pretty controlled with that. I would do like a one rep max every like once a month or something. It was just stuff that I wouldn't just keep hammering away. It'd be like, okay, let's test it out, let's back off, let's do a lot of volume and then test it. So, and then I had a couple friends that would lift at the weight club, whether it be power lifters or actual Oli lifters. And so they were like, hey, come over at some point. And it was like, I will, I will. And then never really happened until like a year later when I was like, when more of my friends were kind of veering off towards there to lift. And then I was just the only one left. So I was like, okay, I'll come in. And I think that's when I started realizing like I was stronger because there a lot more were geared towards one rep maxes and stuff like that. So then we'd be testing those out. I would look on the board. I'd either be close or take something. And I was like, okay. And the other aspect too was I always felt asymmetrical. So as you know, with bodybuilding, everything's about appearance and looks. So that was something where I was like, well, I can't really change how I'm built. But if I'm strong and all they care about is being strong, I can be pretty asymmetrical. And as long as I get to lift, they're happy. So I was like, maybe I should make that switch.
So what was your first competition?
So technically my first competition was I think in 2017. That was one where my coach um was like, you should get experience into meet, but we never really prepped for that. I was supposed to be in wraps, but I did sleeves because at the time, again, I was very new to this. So in UPA, you're allowed 3 meter wraps. I had 3 meter wraps, but I thought we were only allowed 2.5 meter wraps. So I was like, well, I signed up for it. This is just experience. We just kind of did it. I normally don't count that as my first meet because we never prepped for it. My first meet I normally count is record breakers, and I think that was 2019. I think Novemberish. I'm trying to remember, but usually I count that one more as my first one just because we actually prepped for that. We actually trained for it, and yeah. So those two, yeah. So that's normally what I count.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I kind of started off. I did like a push pull, and so I don't
Hmm.
really count that as my first meet either because it's kind of like a. I mean, yeah, it's a meet, it's sanctioned, but at the same time, it's like
Hmm.
I wasn't really. It was kind of a short. I think I prepped for it for like 4 weeks at the time. I was like, oh, all you need is 4 weeks to peak, and I was like, I didn't know what I was doing, so I kind
Oh
of
yeah.
feel you on that one for sure.
I do have to say though, it was nice to feel that because I kind of got my nerves out of the way because it was more, in my opinion, a local meet. Granted, it was a bigger local meet because I know like in Dubuque in Iowa, their UPA Power Weekend is a pretty big thing for them in general. So again, granted, like it was bigger in that aspect, but the next meet I did, that was more like with a lot of the people I looked up to in the powerlifting industry, kind of. So again, that kind of settled my nerves to know what to expect. I mean, still, when you keep moving up, you do get a little jitters before the squat, but once you're there, it's like, well, it's not really different, and I should just treat it as such so that I don't psych myself out.
Yeah.
But through college, that's where met my first coach, and he coached me up until this past year. So that was really nice to have too, because you know, I being there, there was a lot of strong people, and it was kind of nice to have someone that I've known for a while to coach me, and especially for the amount of time. That was a big thing too.
Yeah. So I guess we can go a little bit about into that too. Is kind of
Hmm.
with having a coach and kind of maybe making the decision to either move on to a new coach, whether
Yeah.
if obviously if there was a problem or something, that's a completely different story. But I guess kind of moving to a new coach, what's kind of some of the decision makers that like you would look for?
Biggest thing would be if you mesh well. That's a big thing that I always look into. I especially now becoming a coach, but beforehand I believe this too. When you first work with a coach, and again, it's kind of like a relationship. If you start working with someone, you have no clue their background. Again, you get sent videos, you get talked to, but it takes time to get to learn to know the nuances of a lifter or a coach. So most times I don't grade them off of the first meet you do, especially if you decide to just jump straight into prep into a meet. Most times as a coach, I don't really want to do that. I want to have some off season work with you to kind of experiment with stuff. But most times then I say, first meet, won't really judge that. Second meet, depending on when I joined for the first meet, it'll be between that second meet and third meet, depending also how long the difference is between those meets. If it's like back to back, no. If it's like a year between, I definitely hold a little more ground that that second meet will be to tell one if I should keep working with them, and two if things are going well. And I think another aspect is just communication as well. So those are things I normally looked at. And again, things were going really well. It just turned into the end where he wanted to pursue different things at the time. So the nice thing was we talked about it on the earlier side. It wasn't like the next I'm done.
Yeah,
So that really helped me start to look for someone that I had in mind or something. So then the transition would be smooth.
yeah, that's good. That's always good to be able to. It's almost like putting in like a 2 weeks notice for work in a way.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. And again, like I would say most of the powerlifting community are pretty, I mean, doesn't mean you like each other, but they're pretty close knit. So, you know, I think it was an easy transition as well. And it was to someone that he liked as well. So, you
Yeah.
know.
So I guess you mentioned you do coaching now. What are some of the, I guess, like the methodologies you kind of incorporate, or like what's kind of like your training look like?
Well, one thing I try and do is not to think of just one aspect in training. If I can get help out of a certain type of trade. So the idea is every athlete you get is not always going to be cookie cutter situation with everything.
Yeah,
So
sure.
again, that's something where I am 100% for. One, we'll start with I always start so I wrote out a skeleton structure of programming. Again, bare bones. These are some of the stuff I mainly want to work with, particularly in prep. But then as time goes on, of course, we see how do you respond to frequency? How do you respond to different types of movements? And then that's the meat of the program that I then start to add on, which then becomes more custom compared to another athlete. So most times, I'm pretty much open with any sort of training just because that's what I've had over my time. And again, I'm never saying like no or yes to something. If it works, it works. And again, it doesn't mean that all of the training has to be the same. I could take two activities from here to another two from another place, and then it works well. But again, we have to test it to find out. So
I think that's something that I definitely do incorporate too, and I think a lot of the shift of coaching now is definitely being able to incorporate all the methodologies because, like you said, you can't just give them some cookie cutter bullshit.
oh yeah. And so again, but a lot of it I also tell people it's trial and error. It's kind of like nutrition too. Like you have to see what works. We'll try something. I might I might have an idea that I feel like would work. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But then that also involves communication with the athlete. Because again, if the athlete's not really communicating anything, and then about 3 weeks later they tell you this hasn't been working this whole time, it's like, well, I need to kind of hear that on a weekly basis when you're filling out everything so that we can make changes. And then there's also the difference between figuring out something is difficult because we're targeting a weak point versus something is difficult because like it's like a physicality thing that you can't do, you know.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind for me is like anytime I use the SSB, I'm like, I hate this shit, but it's a weak point because I need to work on that upper back.
Oh yeah. I mean, and I try to use examples too, like with my life. Again, like I have a lot of elbow issues and some of my movements for close grip and everything I physically can't do. And honestly, I've had it before where some people are like, well, you're just lazy and you just don't want to do it. I'm like, I'm the last person to do that. If I do a close grip bench, let's just say, I would want to do an actual close grip bench. I wouldn't want to just move the finger in half a width because most times, and this is what I preach to with my athletes, if we do an accessory movement or a variation, I want it to be done so we can get the most out of it. I don't want to, because again, if you're kind of doing it, but not really, then it's not going to have as much carryover. So that's something I wanted to do for a while just with injuries and stuff. And it's just frustrating too. So,
Yeah.
mhm.
So I guess for you, maybe walk us through what like your typical training week looks like.
Yep. So the nice thing so far between my first coach and my second coach, they've kept the same training aspect. I used to be 5 days a week. This was a couple of years ago, and now I'm down to 4 days a week. And it would most times day one, which is usually a Monday, will start as primary squats. Day two, which comes right after that, would be secondary bench. Then I usually have a day off. Then day three on a Thursday, that would be more my primary deadlift day. And day four on a Friday or a Saturday. Most times when I get into prep, I usually bump that day to a Saturday, give myself another day of rest is my primary bench day.
Yeah. So that's actually pretty much very similar to what I do, and I think over the past few years, I've definitely found that kind of rotation has definitely shown the best recovery wise and just like training stimulus wise too.
I know a lot, like especially once you start lifting heavier weights. I'm always for like you don't need to I mean, you can train more frequently, but as long as the intensity is way low on some of those days, I definitely feel like you can easily overdo it,
Yeah.
especially even when you don't think it's too heavy, like, it's only RP 8 or something like that. It's like, well, the other days it's just, I feel like when you get stronger, you need that much more time for recovery as well. So,
Yeah, especially in a prep. I think like maybe having a fifth day in an off season to do just like a back and bicep day or something, or like kind of like a weak point accessories day is always something that I could get behind. But I during prep, I think
yeah.
4 days is a perfect frequency.
That's again like I've talked to some of my friends that coach and when the aspect of talking about 3 days of a certain lift, so again 3 days of squatting, 3 days of benching. Most times I always try to, if we get to that, it would be a main, primary day, secondary day, and then the third day I really want to stay away from any sort of barbell motion. I don't want, again, like more dumbbell machine work, stuff that again at the time via the bodybuilding mentality, it's like you can feel burnt out if you go, but the CNS isn't as fried, so you can recover a lot quicker.
Yeah.
So, mhm.
So in terms of recovery, maybe what are some of the recovery tools you like to use or incorporate?
Oof, boy. Well, mainly I don't. I I try to go see like PT for now. That's a big thing for me. Again, just because I already have underlying injuries. I do go to chiropractor. I try to keep that up as well. Just recently, with my workload at my job, it's been very difficult to have time. And biggest thing is just sleep and nutrition. And even that right now has been a little bit of a struggle just because of the workload, pretty much. But I know for a fact, if I have bad sleep and bad nutrition, it makes the week that much worse. So that's the one thing I'll push before people do anything else first is like just first again, can you get your sleep or nutrition more at 100%? Again, we have other outside jobs, majority of us, and it's hard to do that. But I want to try at least make those improvements before we start trying to find other aspects that might be an issue. But again, like if we're not improving the base fundamentals, sometimes the other help's not going to be as much.
Yeah. Kind of like if you're spending like an hour foam rolling and stretching every day, but you're only getting 6 hours of sleep, like take that extra hour for sleep.
Yeah, exactly. So I think some of that aspects kind of help because majoritively now I try to work from home just because of, again, the workload. If I was not having so much work that I would go into the office, but I live in the outskirts of uh, Chicago and it takes me about an hour and a half to 2 hours to drive in. So
Yeah, I'm the same
it's
way.
not worth it.
Because I'm like about I'm like 20 miles out of Boston, but with the traffic in
Hmm.
Boston's insane.
Yeah,
So,
it's
um,
awful.
yeah, I saw in your bio that you're an engineer. What exactly do you do for engineering?
So I'm a senior VDC engineer, so that's on the virtual side. Again, more with computers, model aspects. I work for a project management firm. So again, those are the companies that run the project. We hire subcontractors to actually build the project, but again, we're telling people how to run it, what to do, and stuff like that. So my job in particular is to basically, with the models that are provided, you could say build the building ahead of time to make sure there's no issues that come up because the last thing you want on a project is to get the materials and they're the wrong dimensions or they're the wrong thing and then that's time that's wasted because it has to get shipped out again and we're wasting time and money. So our job is to try to really condense that so there's not, or at best no issues, but as you know with construction there's always issues. So
Yep. Yeah. So, because I'm a validation engineer at a pharmaceutical company, but
mhm.
my workload is relatively light. So, um, I guess for someone like you who's pretty busy, what's the work life balance in terms of your day to day job with powerlifting?
uh I would say right now there isn't as good of a work-life balance. There was at the start. Again, we're just getting to the our busy time. I was told that, well, it is June now. I was told around now it would lighten up, but it's gotten worse. Just because this project I'm working on is pretty massive, and we normally need three of us engineers on working on it on the virtual side, and we have two. And even with me, I just kind of started with this company, so I'm very raw still to it. So I would say we have one and a half out of the three people. So there's that, and then we're trying to introduce um, a new application to be used. And again, that's more research and development, which takes me away from the actual coordination aspect. So right now, my usual thing is, I get up, I work until, so if I start at 5 because I don't need to drive in, then I'll finish around 3, hopefully, just because I can shift time because I'm starting so early.
Yeah.
I'll go to gym and then I'll usually come back and start working again until like midnight or 2,
Oh wow.
depending on what needs to get done. Well, a lot of stuff gets backed up. Some days, one day I was like, I can't do this. And it helped because I got a lot more sleep because that's the aspect that I decide whether to drive in most of the time because I'm like if I'm up till 1 or 2 a.m. I'm not getting up at 5 to drive in.
Yeah,
Like
that's
I need my sleep. So, and that's the one thing the company's kind of been like as long as I'm doing my work and I'm readily available to communicate, they've been fine with it. However, I do have like technically on my Wednesdays we have like a lunch get together meeting downtown where I try not to miss that so that they can see I'm still alive and I'm working. So
yeah. So, what's kind of next in the cards for you? What's coming up next?
so I am technically signed up for the American Pro 3. That is in November, I'm pretty sure. We have to see just because again, I just unfortunately like after Ghost, I somehow popped some in my hip, which was really frustrating. I don't know what happened. I was able to bench just fine, just deadlifts. I couldn't lock anything out because it hurt too much, and that's why I didn't take a third attempt on squat. And that definitely sucked because things were flying really well, and then just felt some. I was like, well, this isn't good, but again, like I'm just starting to get back to be able to. This past week, I was able to deadlift with minimal pain, which was a first in a while because I was still doing some. We took out deadlifts since coming back, but we have been doing like RDL movements, and they still weren't feeling the best. And of course, like if you're in pain, it's very hard to show strength.
Yeah.
And especially right now, we'll see on Monday, but since again we took out squats but we started introducing box squats back, and again the hip has not been liking that. I was hoping that the recovery process was a lot faster so far, and I'm just hoping it's not something serious. But for right now, the past two meets I've done, the American Pro 2 and Ghost, it's been very exhausting preps where I don't want to get to a point where I don't want to compete, but like, I want to be able to feel like I'm fresh coming into a meet, not just kind of doing it just to do it. So the aspect is maybe I'm still judging it every couple of weeks if I still want to do the meet. But the idea is like, I don't need to push myself to do it. And if the next meet I do is just Ghost in a year and I'm at 100%, I would rather have that too, because just with this, and then also my elbow isn't like it started getting better after surgery and then it's gotten worse. So I'm supposed to be going in on Friday, get that checked out to just see like what can be done, because again, it's something over the years like you can build a tolerance to it, but it's very exhausting to just deal with it. So
So I know you competed in past coast clashes in the American Pro. Obviously, that's kind of like the Raw Guys Super Bowl in my mind. So I've had a few other guests that have competed on it, and I kind of want to hear what your experience was like with the both of them.
with both American Pro and Ghost.
Yes.
Okay, so Ghost, this past year I felt was a little bit better. I did the first inaugural Ghost Clash. That was done at I forgot the athletic facility, but it was more open to the air, and that was pretty rough. Again, I would say the amateur day had it worse because that was hot and very humid. And then our day, I think it rained the day before, so it was cool, but it was very humid as well. So again, I already have issues with gripping a bar, so that didn't really help for my deadlifts and everything. But overall, and that meet too, I just come off of a quad tear as well, and that one they did wraps for. So again, I like the way Alex holds stuff. I was very happy because I saw with Ghost Clash 2, it got moved to the brewery. So I was like, well, damn. Like again, I was coming off of not an injury then, but I was coming off of my surgery, so I didn't do that meet. But I was like, oh, I'm hoping for Ghost Clash 3, it's in an same area such as that, and it was. So I I liked it a lot. I felt more, because it was inside. I definitely felt better about that. Also, with the fact a couple of years later, I feel like I understand my body more and aspects with that. So I didn't feel like so like new to everything too. So again, like I really like that. And my goal is hypothetically to always keep Ghost Clash to be my raw meat in sleeves, and then the American Pro will always be my wrapped meat. And so with the American Pro, I did the American Pro 1, American Pro 2, and same thing though in wraps. And I've enjoyed my time doing that. I do like the production aspect of that as well. I know it's going to be moved to a different location now, which sometimes I'm like, if the location was working before and things got moved around to make it better, and then now we're leaving, it's like, oh, okay. But I definitely enjoyed that. Granted, like, let me think. My first meet I did there, things didn't go as planned because coming into that, I had a ruptured like eye. So I couldn't really squat at all because like the pressure got to the point where it black out. But then at least my second time at Ghost, that was me kind of coming back from injuries and stuff like that. So I actually that's the one time I say to people that's the one time I was happy with going. I think I went 7 of 9, but it was something where I was like very proud of myself with, and something I would not be like upset that I went 7 of 9 because, as you know, a lot of the captions are not the meat that we wanted,
Yep.
but it's something where I was like I was very happy with. So.
Yeah. So I guess a question that just kind of came across my mind was with all the production and the like kind of like the big stage like that, is that
Mhm.
something like that kind of gets in the way, or is that something that is pretty well balanced?
Um, I've never thought it's gone in the way ever. I mean, you do have opportunities. I think with the American Pro, you had opportunities for interviews and stuff like that, which were, in my opinion, kind of set at times where, again, if you're cutting weight, that's not really a viable option. But again, coming into those meets, I have a goal, which is the meet. Everything else comes second. So it never was a hard like decision to make about like, oh, should I do it or should I not? I'm like, I'm here to compete. If I want everything to be as easy as possible. I don't want to just, break what I'm doing just to go do this. It makes it 10 times harder. So again, that's my aspect and how I view stuff. So it like I said, it's more straightforward for me. And I've never felt like I've never felt like anything like that has gone in the way. I think the only time like production aspect, I did the Kern US Kern like 2021. And I know there they had some lights that were kind of just shining in your face the whole time. But then again, like I kind of zone out, so I'm not really looking around. So it didn't really upset me, but for some people it was just blinding in their eyes. And so that would be the only thing. But majoritively, I've never had an issue with their production. And again, I've liked it. But again, most times when I'm stepping onto the platform or I'm there, I'm kind of not really focused on that. I'll usually appreciate it if I watch the live stream afterwards, or if I'm done, which lately that hasn't been the case. If I'm on like the day one and there's another day two afterwards, and then I come and then I can actually enjoy it. But most times, I've always been the past couple meets day two, which kind of sucks because even day one you can't really be there to enjoy it. You're just kind of watching the live stream. So
Yeah, I mean, those are two meets that I definitely have my eyes on in the next few years. Hopefully, it continues on. Whether it's Ghost Clash 4, Ghost Clash 10, I want to get out there at some point. So, um, I know you mentioned cutting. Is that something that you have to do, or do you relatively sit close to weight?
I mean, I always will have to cut, but it's something where like I don't want to ever be above 10 pounds above my weight class. That's just how I am. I have a lot of friends in the 220 that sit about 245, 240.
Yep.
And I'm like, yeah, I know I would be stronger, but I don't know how well that cut would go. And some of the things that help me too going into, 12 weeks out is just cleaning up my diet. So by the time I get to that week out where I start my water cut, hypothetically, I've dropped maybe an extra 3 pounds. So it's only a 7 pound water cut. So I know for the American Pro, the past two meets have been pretty good because I've been able to cut down to like 214, which normally before I'd cut to 219. Granted, I've been sitting, of course, like a little bit lighter. But majoritively, I try to make it so that it's easy for me to make that cut to 19 because for some reason in my head, I don't want to be 220 when I weigh in. I want to be 219. That sounds a lot less. But most times, as long as I'm able to hit that, then it kind of takes the pressure off. So if I want to lose a couple more pounds, I don't really care, as long as I'm not feeling like I'm gassed or anything.
Yeah. So another thing with those bigger meets where like the coefficient obviously has actual
Hmm.
like basically money value to it.
Yeah.
What's kind of like the approach going into it? Whether like I know you obviously you compete at 220, but like oh should I go down to 212 because this will do that? Like is that something that's kind of in your mind, or is that something that your coach does, or you kind of just get to the weight and compete?
Just mainly get to weigh and compete. I will cut, like I said, I'll sometimes cut down an extra several pounds if I'm with someone at the sauna and they're taking more time. I'm like, well, I can just hop in for another session, kind of lose maybe another half pound, get back out, not have to go in immediately. So it's pretty easy. But again, I'm on that cusp right now where like, if I do really well, I might get into the placement, but it's not like for first or something like that, especially at these meets. And especially with the fact of my deadlifts and stuff like that, it's just something where I'm not going to really worry about. So again, more for my personal dots, I would say that's where I would cut a little bit more. But other than that, it's like, I want to try to keep improving my total in in my weight category basically. And again, if I somehow have a really huge shoot up on off season training where my total goes up, then I might think about it. But so far, everything's kind of been, roughly the same with certain aspects. So I'm like, I'm not going to worry about that because I feel like I would have to cut a lot more than I would want to.
Yeah, and for me, I was kind of just recently, like I just kind of left the 242 weight class. I was always right around there. I would cut like, I don't know, 2 or 3 pounds, but I wouldn't even call it a
Hmm.
cut. I didn't water load or anything. But now that
Hmm.
I started putting on weight, going up to the 275, the last meet I just recently did, I was sitting around like 250 like during prep,
Hmm.
and I was planning on cutting to 242, and then everyone was like, "No, go 275, go 275." And um, for me, I was kind of agreeing on that mindset now, where it's like if you're kind of doing like a local meet where you're just trying to put up a PR total, like I don't think it's
Hmm.
you don't need to make the cut, and especially for someone like I'm 24, so I'm still growing, and like I have plenty of time to get bigger, and I have a large frame, so I don't think it's worth trying to cut weight just to maybe improve my dots for something on a local
Yeah,
meet.
yeah, especially because again, if you have a large frame, most times if you're cutting down, you're going to dry yourself out. And that's something to be, worry about injuries and stuff like that. But the nice thing is, even though you declared 275, it doesn't mean that you have to be 275 on the platform.
Exactly.
And I'm glad everything's based on dots more because again, you can just keep progressing yourself, building lean tissue up to that weight class. Hypothetically, you might not even get ever up to 275, but the point is, you could definitely pack on some good weight. And this, with one of my friends, Johnny Kaufman, he decided maybe two the right thing to do, and it's, in my opinion, done wonders.
Yeah,
So
he's an
I don't
animal.
think he'll ever come back to 220, which I don't think it's going to ever benefit him. So I would definitely say, hey, like the way you're moving weight right now, again, you don't need to shoot up ridiculously in weight, to fill it out yet. But again, just not having to cut, I think that's a lot.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I definitely could see the performance. Obviously, you're heavier. Like, I think a huge thing too is obviously for bench, like having that extra thickness, shortening that range of motion, obviously helps too.
Oh yeah.
And then I guess kind of on the other aspect of it too, if you blow it up or get too big too quick, then it's gonna fuck up all your deadlift leverages and that. So it's kind of there's kind of like a little balance game too.
I have that issue like with my hands where they get too fat if I try to refeed too quickly. So most times, again, I sit about 10 pounds above my weight class. I always feel like that's kind of a controlled 10 pounds. So it's pretty easy for me after weigh-ins to shoot back up to about 242 at the end of the night, about 236, depending on where end my weight cut. If I'm at 219, 242 is pretty easy to get to. If I finish at 214, 236, 235 is where I finish. But that's stuff where like I fill up pretty well and then I try to make sure I don't lose too much overnight depending on my digestion. But that's something I ran into a couple of meets where like my hands just swelled up so much after squatting and after benching. And that was something I tried to handle, which the one good thing from this past meet at Goes, I did everything that a lot of my friends had told me to do to reduce swelling. One, I was also lighter too, which helped. Other aspects, I took out other like more water retention for the orals and stuff, so that was out. The only issue was I had popped my hip, so grip was great. I just couldn't pull. So I'm hoping the next meet I do, I'll do the exact same thing except hurt my hip, and we'll be able to show something.
Yeah. So you mentioned that deadlift was kind of a weak point. Is that mostly
Yep.
due to the hand issue for you?
Yes. Yeah. So this was right before I started getting coached for powerlifting. Again, I was doing like rear delt flies. I think they were with like 120-pound dumbbells. And I was doing so I technically I wasn't even supposed to be doing a back day that day. I was supposed to do another leg day, but I kind of pulled my quad a couple days prior with squatting. So I was like, I either take the day off or I just come and do a back day. So I was like, I'll do a back day. And literally, I was doing those reverse flies, and all of a sudden I heard like again, I had earbuds in, but it sounded like a huge bang. And my elbow, my right elbow, just got this white hot sensation, and then I couldn't move my elbow. And I was like, well, shit, okay. And so again, like after a day or so, like that immediate sensation was gone, but I tried benching, and any type of benching movement when I would try to bend my elbow, it would just all of a sudden seize up. And then I had to make sure I had someone to catch the weight. Otherwise, I couldn't get it off me. So that was something after a couple of days after that, I woke up and my hand and forearm were like asleep. And so I was scared about that. I went to PT, went to a couple of doctors, one in Minnesota, one in Iowa. They said, well, I've had so many issues with this. So like some of the scans and everything took a long time because they couldn't find anything really wrong with it. And then the doctor said, well, if it's not getting it worse, you don't need to do anything about it. So I was like, okay. So had that for about 7 years. Again, it was over time, you keep looking up stuff. So I kind of had it kind of figured out that was an ulnar nerve that was impinged. Didn't know how bad, but again, since then, my forearm and hands to a certain point were just dead pretty much and just felt weird, but I got used to it. It started going really downhill, I think, in the middle of 2022, I'm pretty sure. And that was something where, again, I was losing so much more range of motion because, again, I'd been competing for several meets, not really any issues. I just couldn't do close, like anything that involved a lot more elbow range of motion. But then I went into a surgeon where I live now, and so he put me into emergency surgery, and then one he was just like, "Why the hell did you wait this long?" I was like, "It's not my fault. Like if I was told that this was a problem, I would have gone in like all those years ago." And so he said it was one of those things where if I made like technically like one bad movement, it would just sever the nerve. And I was like, oh shit, because again, I've been trying to force range of motion with a lot of stuff. So I was like, well, shit, this is bad. So I got surgery on that. It started getting a lot better because I had PT, and then I also had like a brace that helped with that range of motion. But then last year, I got let go from my job, and the brace that I was renting from like the hospital or the clinic, instead of being like 20 bucks a month, it ended up being 500 bucks a month without insurance. So I returned that, and I'm pretty sure when I went back to low bar, uh, it kind of shocked it did something where it kind of shocked those nerves and everything. And basically overnight, I lost about 30 degrees of range of motion. Again, it's still better than it was before I got surgery, but it's definitely not comfortable like it was when I was prepping for a meet in May last year. So
Yeah, I mean, obviously dealing with injuries like that is tough and kind of annoying for sure. But I guess kind of working through something like that with training for it. What are some of the things that you've done to try to make your deadlift catch up in a way?
well, big thing is we're trying to work on getting a lot of my forearm and elbows. So again, my elbows are an issue where I can't lock them out fully. And so if I'm not able to lock out my elbows fully, it loads the bicep, it loads the forearms a lot more, and then your grip kind of dies out. I notice when I'm able to kind of have a better day where my elbows are kind of more locked out, grip's not really been an issue. So there's that aspect was which I try stretching. However, recently I've had the issue where if I try to again like I can't really hyperextend my elbows, but I'll try to just to get them straight. And that will irritate the forearm so much where I can't bench that week just because it just feels like something's just torn pretty much. But there's like that aspect. I mean, I do my my grip work. But most times now it just comes down to if we can really, I don't know how to put it, like just straighten out the arms pretty much. And so again, I definitely my strength has gotten better than before. And but I feel like until I get this kind of more figured out, um, it's just kind of gonna plateau a little bit and keep improving, but I kind of have to have everything line up perfectly, which is frustrating because it's like I can't progress them. So
So, granted, if you are healthy, go to the American Pro, maybe what are some of the
yeah.
goals you have in mind for the meet?
Oh, well, it would be bench 600 or 606. For squats, again, that's something where, if I'm feeling good, 881 to 903 would be nice for a squat in reps. However, there's been a couple of years where like we were kind of focused on that. And if things didn't align, we weren't close because we were making decent jumps. So this past American Pro, I was like, well, I know what my meat max is for a squat. And I can really, I mean, that's like 30 pounds less or 40 pounds less, 50 pounds, something like that, less than what we've been trying to do for a couple meets. I'm coming in kind of like off of an injury and a tear. I can just chip this pretty easily. And then guess what? I can feel good because I upped my comp deadlift. So, squat. So the aspect is, yeah, I want at some point a 900 squat, but for me, it's like, I can always just keep comp. In my opinion, I feel like it can be pretty cut and dry to do that for now. Again, if we're talking 2.5 kg jumps to chip it, but bigger goals would be um, uh, starting off a 400 kg squat, 881, and then the next one would be 903, and then for deads would be like deads. I just want to PR it. That's pretty much it. I do want in the 700s at some point, but again, I don't want to be too optimistic about stuff. So as long as I can PR something, I'll be happy.
Yeah, I mean, a 600-pound bench at 220 would be really impressive. I mean, just looking on Open Powerlifting, I can see there's only been four people that do that. So I wish
Oh
you the
yeah.
best of luck with that for sure.
I definitely think we were around that for Ghost this past year. It was just very, very long commands, which,
Yes.
I won't ever fault that because again, that's part of the ambiguity of the rule. It's up to the judge.
Yeah.
And it's definitely something I never want to get a lift and then it's like a really bad call because then you get chewed out for that.
Yeah.
So that's stuff where I'm like, you know what? I was successful in all three attempts. They were really good pauses, so I don't feel like I can get in like people be upset with the form or the quality. But I do feel like, if I've gotten calls that some meets have gotten in the past, I definitely feel like an extra 10 pounds was at least in the cards there. So, and especially for open powerlifting for full power, I know John has the number one spot at 600 pounds. And so again, I would want that, or at some point I do want 5 red bench, which would be nice in a cop. So 606.
Yeah.
So my goal is at some point to get that bench uh, title back because I got it. I had broken that in at Power Surge in 2021. I had chipped Mike McDonald's bench record again, full power, not bench only too.
Yeah.
But that was held for like 45 years or 47 years. So I was very that was my first goal to ever get, and then ever since then it's been more trying to keep a balanced lifter, but then also to reach that 600-pound mark.
For sure. Yeah, that'd be awesome to see. So I think we can wrap things up here. I'll ask you my final question. If you could give a new powerlifter or someone going into their first meet a word of advice, what would it be?
One, live in the moment. Two, not again, you can take the meat seriously, but there is a point where again, you're new to this lifting aspect. In my opinion, we don't you don't know everything that's going to work at 100%. So don't hold too high expectations off of a first meet. If you do that and you start off like kind of being disgruntled about what total, I feel like that can really lead to a part where you start instead of loving powerlifting, you feel like it's more a chore.
Yeah.
And I think that the other aspect is to, again, be controlled with your goals, and don't try to jump up too much too fast, because that's a big thing I see with a lot of the younger powerlifters or the newer powerlifters, where again, like they will try to keep PR and stuff weekly, which again, if it's, I always keep telling them, if it's there at the intensity, there's no problem with that. But then it gets to a point where, a lot of these younger lifters are in college, or they have like midterms or something, and they go with a week that's been crap, and then they're like, "Oh, still gotta up the weight," and then they just get stapled. I'm like, "Do you really think that was the wisest choice?" And yeah, that's the big aspect, where just because you PR during the prep or off season doesn't mean it's going to set you up for a good PR on the platform. And that's what we care about. We don't care about if you PR your last heavies during prep, if it means that you go 4 of 9, 5 of 9 on the platform because you're gassed.
Yeah.
So
Awesome. Well, I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to come on. It was a pleasure.
yeah, it was great having this talk, man.
Thank you.
Look forward to it.